This is the Bottom Shot Podcast.
Pulvereri is up high. They come out of turn number 4. Stutter between the turns. The fans come to their feet.
It is Ted Christopher still in command. Keith Rocco right there on his back bumper.
Bringing Stafford Motor Speedway's past and present together.
They are side by side running for the finish line. It's a photo finish.
Deep into turn number 3. He goes in deeper than most. Christopher is in trouble. It is Keith Rocco to slingshot to the bottom, and he'll take down the win.
A Stafford Motor Speedway production where we will hear from the personalities from the past and present that found success on the legendary half-mile oval.
The scoreboard shows goose eggs as they wait. It's Pulvereri. He wins it by inches over Richie Evans in the Spring Sizzler.
Unbelievable chain of events.
Now, here are your hosts, Paula Root and Kyle Rickey.
All right, guys, we're back on the Bottom Shot Podcast. We have a special guest, the world-famous Ryan Preece, 2012 Stafford Speedway SK Modified Champion, 2013 Modified Tour Champion, and current driver of the JTG Daugherty number 37 in 2023.
Yep.
And also racing extraordinaire now with the big victory at, what was it, Myrtle the other night?
Myrtle Beach, yeah. Might as well, we got nothing else to do. Might as well be good at something. So,
yeah.
Been,
We're taking a break, but you're staying busy doing TI racing. You're currently in your setup at the moment, I see.
Yeah, so I was at my shop. I was going to do it there, but I didn't realize that you can't use a Apple laptop to join in on the Zoom deal. So I had to run home because I didn't have any cords to plug my phone in since it's always almost dead. So I ran here and plugged in and sat in my little chair, which just happens to be one of my racing seats.
Looks good.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So we appreciate you coming on the show. We enjoyed kind of telling the bio of all our drivers at Stafford, and you have 35 career victories at the track, including a ton of SK wins. There was a couple of seasons you just straight dominated at Stafford, kind of stunk the show up, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So get us to kind of talk to us about how, your first memory at a track. When did you start going to the track, and kind of when did it come, I want to be a driver?
So I grew up on a racing family, so it was really never even a thought to not race cars. Obviously I watched your podcast with Woody and Keith, and we all have really way different stories with how we got into this. I remember one of my first memories was really my father had a late model, and he took me in it, and he put me in the side. People would probably freak out if this was nowadays, but in the 90s, early 90s, he put me in it. He drove me up the street, and we went back, and it's just like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So as soon as we could ride a bike or whatever, we were putting cards with those, what do they call them now? The clips
paper,
or whatever,
to make some noise,
make the race
tire.
start.
Yeah.
So I remember going to Riverside Park, Thompson, my father, Stafford, and as soon as I was probably 12, I'm pretty sure I had a fake birth certificate that said I was 16. You know what I mean? So there was a solid 3 years of going to your track or whatever it was, of sneaking into the pits or saying I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure a lot of us, all at the young age, we do that.
Yeah,
we're all doing whatever we can just to get into the pits as soon as we can. So that was really the start of me going to Stafford. That was usually on tour nights or whatever it was. But yeah, no, I grew up, my grandfather owned a modified, and my father had a full body car. He drove street stocks, had a late model. And as soon as we were old enough at 6 or 7 years old, there was a quarter minute of track, 5 minutes from our house. We went over there, checked it all out. And just like many of the other racers nowadays, we all pretty much start go-karting or quarter midgets and just progress up the ranks. So, I was fortunate enough to be born into a racing family. So the commitment from my parents and my family was already there, and I love it. So it was that's all we ever did.
Yeah, and you mentioned your grandfather, very famous car owner at Stafford over the years, had a lot of great drivers, Ed Flemke, Gene Bergen, you kind of take pride in, carrying on that short track, the modified tradition?
Oh, yeah. It's like we talked or just briefly touched on. I enjoyed the 3-4 nights a race, 3 or 4 nights a week deal. Everybody kind of in our community thought my goal was to get to Cup, and ultimately I think all of us hoped to get there. But my goal was to be racing at Thompson, Stafford, New London when it was open, Riverhead, wherever I could, anytime I could. My goal was just to be a full-time modified racer when I was 16 or 18. And obviously you grow up and a lot of things change, but it's really cool to look back, 10 years ago, 2010. I think that was when, was it 2010? I think I got my first SK Modified win at your track.
September of 2010 in the 40 car.
Yeah. And it was holding off Woody. I remember this race. So Woody and I were actually out of the same race shop. This is back when I raced with Bob Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Yep, Hitchcock and Mike Paquette. And we were doing some front geometry stuff and just messing around with a couple things. And it's like it worked really good, and we were good right away. So when we won that first night, I was blocking Woody because he had blocked me a few weeks before. So I just did what he did to me. And that almost started a rivalry with me and Woody. And it was a lot of fun because, I'd go up there during the week and he was there and we were separated in the shop. There was literally, one side was one and the other side was the other. So it was a lot of fun. And looking back at it, those are a lot of memories that, a lot of cool stories just going back and looking on. And Woody was there a lot, and he worked a lot of hours. I remember that. So it's cool. I'm going to be touching on all these different things, but what Sid's View and Sean did this year, kind of going to the different shops. It's nice to show that side of the race with the drivers and teams, just because a lot of the fans don't get to see that stuff that everybody, the owners, the sponsors, and the drivers and the crews go through to get to the racetrack every single week. Because I tell a lot of people, weekly racing is some of the toughest, hardest thing to do, just because you're working, people are working their day jobs, and then at night they're going to the shop to get things done. So, yeah.
And it's every single Friday where if you have a wreck, you got 7 days to turn it around. It's crazy.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
you touched on, you started to run SKs at Stafford in 2010, but prior to that, you kind of went from, I guess, a karting all the way to the tour mods. Was there a step in between there as well?
Oh yeah. No, I went from quarter midgets to go-karts, and I had an older brother who raced. So I raced at Whip City for a year or two. And then I ran 270, which is basically like a 250 motor, 2-stroke motorcycle engine, and a 600 cc. Yeah, basically. And so I went to those, and my father and my brother, basically, he stepped out of racing. He was, doing other things. So I loved racing, and we traveled out to Indiana. And growing up, I didn't necessarily say I was going to end up in a modified. I was like Bobby Santos in a similar fashion with midgets. I loved midget racing. I loved Silver Crowns. I loved everything about them. So we were out at Mahoning Valley, which is a small quarter-mile racetrack in Pennsylvania, and I was probably 12 or 13 at the time, and I was winning. Billy Pouch Jr. and I always talk about that one time, or a race that we had done, and I passed him with like 2 to go with the 600 micro on asphalt. Well, the next time we showed up there, this guy across from us said to me, "Hey, why don't you jump in my race car?" And I'm 12, 13 years old, probably 100 and whatever pounds soaking wet. And I'm shy. Well, my father brought me over there, and he puts me in it. The guy's a lot bigger than me, so we put cushions around me and pull the belts tight. Well, I got up there, and we were fast, like right away.
Is this a
so
modified?
I ended up driving for him. This was a tour mod, but
Tour
it
mod,
was
Mahoning.
because that's all they don't have. They don't have Sunoco or SK mods in Pennsylvania. It was full blown tour modifieds. So I ended up going out there, raced for him a couple times. We ended up at the end of the season selling the micro, for like $10,000. So Greg Narducci, we ended up buying the number 30 that Ted Christopher used to drive. That white number 30, Greg owned it. We ended up buying it turnkey, $10,000. 23-degree motor, old
Wow.
19, I think it was like a 92 or 93 Troyer Modified. So my father and I, that was our first go at modified racing. We went to Mahoning, Mountain, or Evergreen, whatever you want to call it now. We did some of the Smart Tour because they would allow me to drive. I couldn't race.
How old were you? 13 still?
I was
14?
13 or 14. Yeah. So
yeah, you definitely couldn't drive in Connecticut.
yeah, no. Things were a little different. It was right at the beginning of when people were starting to get into big cars at young ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'll say is my father definitely did it in the right way of things, with bringing me to places with not necessarily, I would say, those bigger shows. It was just smaller shows, get me experience. He wouldn't let me race. I remember the first, we went to New Smyrna and all these races. Every time a caution came out, he made me go to the back. Like, he wouldn't want me to be with everybody. He wanted me to just get laps. He wasn't trying to throw me in with the Tigers. And so that was really how I got my start in a tour mod. But it was really good. I'm really appreciative, looking back now, and I see kind of how a lot of people are kind of going through the ranks and just jumping right in. I appreciate the way my father and my family did it for me and got me the laps, got me the experience. And so that was really how I started with the whole tour mod. I did things backwards. I got in a tour mod and then I went to an SK.
Yeah. So that time you're at, you're in your micro sprint. The guy calls you over and says, "Hey, kid, come try this out." You get in.
Yeah.
How awesome was that tour mod going around that little tiny track with that power?
It was just, it's a big circle. So it's not even like Seekonk where, well, you know what? Actually, I'm lying. It's got a lot more grip than Seekonk did. I remember you could get in the power. So I remember the power to weight ratio deal with that 600 micro. It's a super light car with enough power, and on asphalt, you were actually faster in the micro by a second than you were in the tour mod. So it really didn't shock me in a sense.
So you were comfortable.
I was comfortable. And I was so comfortable that the next time I got in that race car, I remember I clipped it. I actually bounced it off the fence.
You wrecked it?
Oh, yeah, I wrecked it.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, my next question was, when was the first time you wrecked that thing after you were so comfortable? All right.
I remember I clipped it that time, and then I also remember there was another time. I think it was like my fourth or third race in the 30 that we got from Narducci. I remember it was like I was running third, and it's like the white flag lap, and being a young kid, you're not thinking, oh, third's good. You know what I mean? You're trying to get second. And I tried putting the nose where it shouldn't have went. And I remember I ended up wrecking and ripping the rear end out of it. And that was the first lesson of trying to pull a rear out of a modified, which, obviously now it takes you, it can take you 20, 30, not even 20 minutes to pull one out, where I remember that day trying to figure it out. It took me a couple hours. So it was a lot of learning moments for sure growing up.
Yeah. So during that time, you were also the mechanic on this car as well. So you're learning about, the setup and about taking out a rear end.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily, when I was younger, it was more of just helping. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, or anybody for that matter, that, I knew everything right from the start. My father just taught me to be a hard worker. And where most people would, if there's a situation of, well, let's just load up, he's taught me to continue going, and no matter what, just make it work, whatever it takes. So, but I would say when I really started to get hands-on setup wise and really start to work, that's where a huge part with Mike Paquette came in. And my father, obviously being around my dad, I learned a lot of the basics and a lot of things with him. But when I started working with Mike Paquette, he would explain things to me, and we do things together, and you just learn so much more about how a race car works, what a race car wants, and then it's all thought process on what you think is right and whether other people think it's right or not. You know, if it makes sense in your head, you try it, and then you kind of start to find that groove of things. But yeah, so it was it's been a heck of a roller coaster for sure.
So let's jump ahead to 2007, your first full-time season on the Modified Tour. I actually found an interesting statistic there.
What's that?
You didn't qualify for your first two events, including the Sizzler. Which I didn't know. So you're a kid, you know, you're getting your feet wet on the tour. You're doing okay, and then you show up to Thompson, you don't qualify. You show up to Stafford, you don't qualify again. How does that, you know, set you back? Are you deflated, or are you just kind of like, let's just keep going? It's a stacked field, so who cares?
I don't know. I don't even really know because it was so long ago. I remember there's actually a video on YouTube from 2007 when I didn't qualify, and I'll go back and look at that and just look at some things. But Stafford, I can't remember when I went out, but I just remember Stafford was always one of those places you didn't want an early draw because the sand, the dirt, and everything got on the track, and you were going to be, you know, half a second off. Even if you were the fastest car in practice or whatever it may have been, you were going to be way off. So that was tough. So yeah, we didn't qualify for those first few races, but I do remember I think we qualified decent at Wall the next race, and then Claremont we almost got the pole like 4 races later. I think we qualified second and just missed it. But
I'm seeing here you were on the pole at Thompson the next time at Thompson.
Was I? I don't know. I have no.
So you didn't qualify. You didn't qualify at Thompson, then you come back and you set on the pole.
You're right. And
finished 31st, but
31st. I'm looking at it now. That's so funny. So I do remember that day because I remember Donnie Leah and a few other guys. You know, I was a rookie. I was 16 years old. What are you going to do if a kid who's, you know, got limited amount of experience on the tour racing with these guys, they came up to me. They're like, hey, man, you know, just take it easy. You know, we think you should just drop to the back. And I'm just like, you know, I don't know. I don't even remember how it went. I remember 2007 was definitely a learning year. Wrecked a lot of stuff. I remember so there was a guy, Jerry McCarskey, that helped my father and I, you know, for a long, long time. And we always joke about that first year of how many right fronts we had to fix. I mean, it wasn't like you just get into something and you have instant success. And most drivers that you look at now, they don't have instant success. I sat here, I watched your podcast, and most of them all talk about the beginning and wrecking a lot of stuff. Yeah. I was no different. You know, I destroyed a lot of race cars. I didn't clip a lot of race cars, but we definitely tore a lot of suspension off.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is how quickly you learn to take care of the equipment. You know what I mean? If you just go out and you wreck for a couple of seasons, you're out of business.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And that jumps forward to the next year when I drove for the Bowlers. It was like all of a sudden one day something clicked. I remember I was in the first race with them in 2008, the Icebreaker, and I just kept beating the bumper off it. And I forgot who I was behind, but I want to say it was Scotty Richards I can't remember who it was, but they basically told me, like, you got to drive past your nose. Like, don't be tearing this thing up or whatever it was. And from there on out, the only time I can really remember wrecking that race car was at Spencer Speedway, and I wrecked it like 3 times in one night. Like, for no reason, was immature, young. Like, we were really fast going through the field, wrecked, and then, you know, somewhere in my head I was thinking, I'm going to make all this up, and it's like, in reality, it wasn't going to happen. So, you know, I remember, though, it was the Spring Sizzler. We qualified on the pole. We were going to win that race, which, going back to 35 races I've won at Stafford, I've probably given away, you know, half as many of that just off motors blowing up. whatever it may have been, just fluke things. I can just think of so many times. It's always when you have that perfect race car, you never win. So, but Stafford Speedway for the Spring Sizzler, I remember when we qualified on the pole, there was the redraw back in the day, so I had to start 10th. We drove to the front, got the lead, blew up, but that was the day everything clicked. You know what I mean? To where how to navigate traffic, how to get through it without wrecking your race car and get to the front and be a winner.
Yeah, and then you grab your first career tour victory at a pretty important track in the modified scheme, Martinsville.
Well, technically it was Stafford. It was. Yes, it was. It was earlier in the year. I got into Todd Zegedy on the last lap. Do you not remember that?
You got disqualified? I don't remember this.
In
a tour race. That never happens in a tour race.
In a tour race. This was,
I don't remember this.
So it was the August race.
Okay.
Jimmy Blue ended up winning it. It was August 8th. And he actually finished second crossing the line. I crossed the line first, but they took the win away. And that was because I didn't mean to at the time. I definitely didn't mean to get into Todd, getting into turn one, but I did.
This is when Todd was in the 2, right?
Correct. And he spun out.
Yep.
And I went on to cross the line first. And they took the win away, which, you know what? Honestly, I don't want to win a race like that. So it is what it is.
That's your first win, though.
That was actually my first win.
Do you count that one as the first win or what? Is that that in your head? No, the Martinsville is the number one.
Because, in the end, you got to really piss me off to make me want to punt you. I'm pretty sure I had a win taken away. Rowan Pennick and I, there's been some good rivalries at Stafford over the years with Keith and I, Woody and I. Really, it was a little bit of a rivalry. It wasn't to the extent. We helped each other, but we raced each other very hard. Rowan Pennick and I and Teddy and I, it was cutthroat on that racetrack.
Yeah, so, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That's some good stuff. So
it was fun.
You grab a win in Martinsville. That's got to be a big, it's Martinsville. That's unbelievable.
Well, that's another thing. That was another controversial one, if you look into. Burt Myers technically celebrated. He won the race, but they yanked the win away from him for getting caught with an overdrive transmission. And, so he ended up getting disqualified. Now, I won for the North no matter what because they had divided points back then.
Mm-hmm.
But technically, I didn't cross the line first at that race. So my first win, it was a really weird season. I won in Martinsville that year because somebody else got disqualified, but I also had my first win taken away.
So you got one back, I guess. I guess it's net and net.
Yeah.
But so the first time you actually drove your car across the line in first and drove it to victory lane was, let's see here, 2009 then.
Not really. That's another thing. So actually, on the tour, yes.
Tour,
on the tour, yes. But 2008 was my first tour modified win at New Smyrna Speedway. But so Riverhead, I remember I had a lot of success at Riverhead. That was a really good track for me. And I remember when I won that race, you were numb. You know what I mean? You didn't really, there was a lot of emotion, but there wasn't. But thinking back, as I've gotten older, I look back at these wins, I look back at these trophies. And before, when I was younger, I just, you think they're just going to endlessly come. You know what I mean? You're going to get one the next week, or the next week you're going to try. Well, as you get older, you realize these things aren't that easy to win. So you start to appreciate them a lot more. And obviously the hard work and effort that goes into them makes it feel that much greater when you do win.
So you continue to drive for the Bowlers, obviously an iconic car. You get a victory at Stafford, and then you eventually come back and you decide, not come back, I guess is not the right term, but you decide to go SK racing as well at Stafford. What drove that? It was just trying to get more laps.
So that all started. Mike Paquette called me. I didn't really know Mike very well at the time. Mike Paquette called me and asked me if I wanted to practice a race car at Thompson Speedway for Albert and Kathy Moniz, because Rowan had to race at Monadnock, I believe. And I was like, yeah, man, of course, I'd love to, because I believe I'd start and park the car. Or I drove it one time at North-South Shootout for them. So I ended up getting in that, practicing, and Bob and Mike had they still have a great relationship, but Bob was like thinking about doing this car that Mike had, how he had built, and Bob was basically, we called it CD North. Okay, he had almost more parts than Mike. So they asked me, yeah. So they asked me if I wanted to race at Stafford on a part-time basis, and to help Mike and kind of try this new car out before he was going to put it into production. And obviously I was all about racing at the time and just, anything I can get in. So we ended up getting in, and I remember my first race. I think we finished, I don't know, like 8th or whatever it was. It wasn't very impressive, but that was the start of the notebook that we started to build. And from there on out, we kept on making the outside work, right? Everybody on a restart, they always wanted to jump to the bottom. And I was like, all right, I'm going to dig to the top and drive it in and keep the momentum going. And we found something that year to make the outside work. And that's really, 2010, 2011, 12, 13, whatever those years were, we were just really in a different area code.
I'd say you dominated. You dominated. 2011, you won 10 times at Stafford.
Was it 2011? Okay. I couldn't remember if that was the year or if it was 2012, but I remember we won a lot of races. So
it was 2 wins in 12. 2013, 10 wins.
Yeah. I remember, so the year 2011, when I won the championship, that was the year Keith and I were like going at it, right? So I'm the new guy. Keith was winning a lot of races the years prior to that. And I come in and I only want to say I won like 3 races or whatever, 4 races that year.
You got 5 here.
Okay, so I got 5. Keith actually was suspended for a week because him and Eric weren't wrecked. And so I remember I was getting prank calls from Keith on my phone at night saying, he was just prank calling me, trying to get whatever it was. And I ended up winning the championship that year, but that wasn't, our best year at Stafford. Yeah. Our best year was 2013 when we won 10 races or whatever it was. And I want to say we didn't win the championship.
No, you didn't.
So
you only had 1. Yeah. So I would kind of credit Ryan Preece for bringing back the outside at Stafford, because now in a lot of cases it's the preferred line. It's kind of, but prior to that car and driver combo coming to Stafford in 2010, 2011, it was the bottom, and it had been that case since the track got repaved in the 90s. So what's the magic at the top? You kind of just took to it, and that's the preferred line around Stafford.
Well, you guys put that grip strip up there now, so it makes it a lot easier.
Not last year. Nope. No? The whole year. Okay. Well, didn't need it.
I think it was probably timing. Obviously, having a really good race car has a lot to credit about that, because you can't go up there and just, you're Superman, you're going to make it work. You got to have a car that's capable of doing it. But at the same time, when was Stafford repaved? What was 96. The last time? 96. All right, so you had 14 years of people running the bottom. That asphalt's eventually going to give out. Well, the higher you go, the fresher the asphalt is. And all it does is you got to have people running up there. You got to have those divisions that clear it off, because you can't just go up there with all the dirt. It's going to gradually moves up. So I think it was just a lot of the right timing. I'm not afraid to go to the top. I come from that midget, background where I drive off the right rear and it doesn't really bother me. So I'm not really afraid of it, but it's always been great. I definitely liked it early on because people just tried to get to the bottom, and it just cleared an open lane that I wanted to run and that my car was fast in. So it made it a lot easier to pass, where over the years people are kind of, they're spreading their wings a little bit and decide they aren't afraid to go to the top. So it makes it a little more difficult to get to the front, but I don't know. I enjoy racing and going where people don't go.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting point about going to the top, I think the SK lights probably also improve that lane as well because they're just such a momentum car. And that right around 08, 09 is when those cars started to come. They were a full-time class then, which probably rubbered up the top maybe just a little bit more to make it happen. So interesting point. Would love to get your take on the difference between running an SK for a sprint for 40 laps compared to a tour event at Stafford, because it's just so different. And from a fan's perspective, the SK stuff is just unbelievable. Like, it's just the SK guys are crazy. They don't know how to conserve, and I love to get you've done.
There
a lot
is no
of
conserving.
So what is the difference?
Yeah, so there's really no conserving. Not from anybody that tells you that they're getting an SK modified and they're conserving is lying. You're going 110% the entire time. And I think that shows. I mean, you look at typically, with the handicap that Stafford has, I didn't start inside the top 12 for however many years. And usually we were in the top 2 to 3 or leading by lap 13, right? Something like that. So, and you look at that, you look at Keith, you look at Woody, you look at all those guys. They're typically right at the front by around lap 15, maybe sooner or maybe a little later. If you're getting to the top 3 by lap 30, you're already behind. You're good luck. Tour racing, we have a lot more horsepower. Aero, whether people want to believe it or not, does
especially
come
at Stafford. It does.
Yeah, it does. I mean, because you're leaning on some things, and so it makes it more difficult inside the driver's seat. You got to have a really good handling race car. You can't just be a tenth better than somebody. You got to be a couple tenths better than somebody to be able to move around and pass people. So, if you had tour type modified to where they were racing once a month and some soft tires that gave out like they do, those 20s and 30s and 10 laps, I think you would see a show like the SK modifieds bring. But when you get in the tour, you have to pick and choose your battles, with it being 150 laps or 200 laps. You got pit stops. The race isn't going to be won in those first 100 or 150. It's going to be won in the last 50. So you really need to think about what you're going to need in your car, what's going to change when you take right sides, or if you take rears, or whatever it does, it changes the balance of the car. So there's just so many different things that come into play when you're racing a tour race and factor in on winning that race. So as far as racing wise, SKs are a lot of fun because you're just, they're underpowered for the amount of tire we have. So you can really whip them around, put on a show, you can race side by side, you can drive it in, that whole deal. The tour cars, you're on the edge. Once you get past lap 30 or 40, you're creeping in on the throttle, you're driving, you're sliding around. There's just a lot more car control involved in those. So it's just two totally different animals. I think Stafford should be the first one to bring back, tour modifieds with 800, 900 horsepower. I think that would be pretty cool. But that's just me.
That'd be something. I don't know how many cars we'd have, but
I think, you want to know what? I joke around. I was just telling somebody the other day, you can build a big cubic inch motor for not a lot of money. So I'm just saying. Hey,
you never know. You never know. In this pandemic that we're in, you never know what's going to come out the other side.
You never know.
So you're driving. So you're competing in the SKs, and then you're driving the bowler car, and you get a call from a pretty powerful team to come drive, and Sanderson owned team, the 16.
Yeah.
How did that come together?
So actually, I left the 3 car in 2010, or was it? No, it was 2011. And I was supposed to be running for CD. We were going to have a house car, John Luke Savage, a couple people, they were all involved. And this was, things got really rough financially for a lot of people. And after 3 or 4 races, we stopped. We weren't doing the full tour. So I was part-time on the tour. I ended up running my father's. We had our own 40 modified, which a lot of people thought that was the same car as the one I drove at Stafford, which it wasn't. So it looked the same.
Yeah.
It was actually, I remember, we'll get to that, but so I got the pole at Thompson in the that was when they had the north-south shootout with when they brought the south and the north together and that whole deal, and so I finished third in the north race or whatever it may have been, and we came into the combination, and just going off topic a little bit, this is part of the rivalry that Teddy and I had. I remember I caught Teddy and I drove down, cleared him like a slide job in a way, and he punted me. I fell back like 10 spots, and I was so pissed because that was the day Doug Covey won, and they won both races, and I really felt like for a 40-lap race that fell into my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Like I'll burn the right rear off really quick. That was a big payday. So, but that day I remember it was like, okay, Ryan Preece, gets in this, that, and we were at Stafford for the fall final. Ended up finishing second behind. I can think of it. Eric Rudolph got his first win that day. That's who it was. And I finished second behind him. And that week, Sly called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing for the World Series?" And it was like, well, nothing. I'm just kind of sitting at home right now. And I went up. They got me fitted in there. We sat on the pole. We were fast in practice. And we ended up dropping a cylinder in the motor, and whatever happened. But that's how that whole thing started. Right place, right time. Mike had stepped away and went to go race with Brad LaFontaine. And I think that was kind of like the start of the Chris Hour deal that they had going. But that was what really, when one door closed at the early on in that season, the next door opened. So it was really just right place, right time. But Eric was a huge part in my racing career. Really, that to this day, Mike Paquette and Bob Hitchcock got everything rolling. And then when I got in Eric's car, we finished second to Doug that year, and then we won the championship the year after, won a lot of poles, a lot of races. That was really what got my modified career, on the fast track.
Yeah, and so you win the title in 2013. During this time, are you beginning to think, hey, this can be a career I could potentially, or are you still in the mindset of, I'm a modified guy, this is a blast, I'm having a good time, I just want to keep clicking these off? Or is anything starting to churn where I want to go south?
No, I didn't think about going I always thought you would get the phone call when I was younger. You're just waiting for the phone call. You're just trying to win races. I didn't think anything of it. All I thought about was I'm getting paid to race a race car right now. You know what I mean? And it was basically, to me, that was like a dream. I didn't have to do something else to I was living at my parents at the time, and it's just a lot easier. So you didn't really need much to get going. But, when you're racing at Stafford, Thompson, Riverhead, and you're on the tour, it all adds up, and it ended up being really well. But, doing I guess I never really thought about the lifelong plan. Some people like to plan ahead. I live life day by day, week by week. I was just worried about winning my next race. When I was at a tour race racing for Eric, I was worried about winning that race. When I was at Stafford Speedway on a Friday night, I was worried about winning that or Thompson or whatever it may have been. My life every day, when we were done at the racetrack, Sunday was usually like a day off or whatever you want to call it. Monday, it was usually with Bob and Paquette, it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If we had to drive up to Charleston, we'd drive up to Charleston. There was a lot of late nights. I remember driving up there, and I actually got pulled over at 2 a.m. by a cop for eating an ice cream cone. Literally, they gave me a ticket for eating an ice cream cone while driving. So there was just a lot of late nights, a lot of those nights that build you as a person.
Mm-hmm. And so you're driving the 16, and then all of a sudden, so you get hooked up with Tommy Baldwin.
Yeah.
And you drive an Xfinity car.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a point where you're like, okay, this is pretty awesome. I'm at Loudon. I'm kind of have a shot at the big time here. First of all, how did that come together? And at that point, is there like, okay, I'm going to commit to this and, try and do it?
Yeah. So Tommy had called East West Marine, which was a sponsor of mine early on in 2000, early on. And we ended up going to meet Tommy. He was at a cup test, I think. And that's how that whole deal came together. And that's how I ended up meeting Tommy. So, when I did that race, I remember, after that race kind of saying to him, I text him all the time, and I didn't really know him much at the time. Now, he's a really close friend, and we, a buddy of mine, we go over to his house sometimes and go hang out. But at the time, I was just texting him or whatever I needed to do. Hey, what do I need to do? Like, what do we need to do? What will get me to this level? And
it was just after that start.
This is after that start, yeah. And then we, the next year we did Loudon, we did Homestead. And, a lot of that was because of Acel Construction. Al Hankey from Mohawk, who's heavily into the short track racing world and dirt racing world and everything. He's a guy that he's just very helpful and goes out of his way to help people and help drivers, get that funding or sponsor people, when they need it. And he was a big role in my career that I met through Tommy. So, the list goes on, to be honest with you, that I could talk about for days, but I'm not going to bore you with it. I'm just very lucky to
lots
have
supporters.
Oh yeah, lots of them.
And so I'm looking in 2020, your first Cup start at Loudon. That is so cool, right? I'm going down the roster here, right? Kenseth, Hamlin, Biffle, Carl Edwards, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon.
Yeah.
You drove against probably one of the best. You drove in probably one of the top Cup fields in the history of the Cup Series.
Yeah.
It's got to be pretty cool.
It is cool. I want to win. That's what I joke with everybody.
That's fair. Yeah.
One day I'm going to look back and really, really appreciate those moments. And I still do. I was actually in Jeff Gordon's last race at Homestead in 2015, which not a lot of people know, right?
That's awesome.
They don't think Ryan Preece. Yeah, exactly. So it's really cool to think back with some of those things, but it's crazy. Life's definitely crazy.
And so I think a lot of us have heard the story about how you bet on yourself, you went with the Gibbs car, and I think all of us have heard that, and it's pretty awesome. It's amazing, and you got the W. I think the whole state of Connecticut and all of New England was going absolutely nuts on that day. But what was the biggest technical driving challenge to go from a modified to these big, these heavier cars? Is there a difference? Is a modified a good place to learn? What was the challenge to make that transition?
If you're going to be a race car driver, you're going to be, and you're meant to do it, you're going to be fine. It doesn't matter if you're in a midget, a modified, a late model. There is no set path. I try to tell people that all the time. You don't have to do this or get this route to get noticed or whatever it may be. You just need to win. You need to win a lot too. But when I was going back and forth between the modifieds and stock cars in 2016, 2017, it really wasn't a big deal for me because I had already been doing it. I was already used to it. It wasn't, such a big transition. I would say last year, I remember I hadn't driven a modified. Probably the longest I hadn't driven a modified was 3 or 4 months. And I went to Hickory with Tommy Baldwin before the North-South Shootout. He needed somebody to drive the car for a test day, and I went to help him. And I remember the first lap, I was like, whoa, these things are way quick. Like, you're on the ground, see the tires again. I'm like, whoa. So it took a lap for it was like, oh, everything came back. But, believe it or not, stock cars actually drive really well. They drive there's so many different, because these guys, there's so many smart people in this deal. They can make them drive.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I always tell a lot of people, you know, like for example, when I finished 17th or whatever at Phoenix, that car drove, you know, it was tight. It was really tight, but it's still fast. Those other cars that are winning are just that perfect. You know what I mean? They're that close. So it's you're usually one step away from being right there. And if you're that little bit off in a cup car or whatever it is, you're going to be, you know, everybody's just that close. But it's definitely different. I'm sure when I get in a modified again, it's going to be like, whoa, this is weird for like a lap, and then it's going to come right back.
That reminded me of a win at Stafford that kind of was a controversial Ryan Preece victory. That was the SK5K when he lost, was it a hose in the first turn? And
that trophy right there.
That is the biggest SK modified payday that Stafford Speedway has ever had.
Yep.
It was $12,000, which is pretty
was a
unbelievable.
big day.
Yeah.
Yep. That was and that was also the year I'm pretty sure I was running the car out of my house.
It was a 6 car.
It was a 6 car. So it was me and Eddie.
Car, yeah.
Yep. So, or not me and Eddie. It was me and Mike Paquette. Like that was it. It was because at the time, you know, through the years, I was with Bob Hitchcock, and then I was with Steve Greer for a year, I believe.
Actually, as a fun fact, my brother has that car, the Greer car, sitting out back.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's SK Light.
So
it's been destroyed about 10 times.
But the car I drove was still the 40. Like it was still the 40 car. So through those years, and then I ended up taking it over. I can't remember if it was 2014 or whatever year, 15, but yeah, so that I remember the radiator hose split. They had to cut the end, throw it back on, and there, you know, the cleanup crew and everything, we were able to get it back out. Joe Ham, actually, to this day, we always joke about it. He went and grabbed a garden hose from inside your infield, and we filled the water back up and went back out. So
I think there's still a Twitter conspiracy that we let the caution go a little bit extra there, but I think for Ryan Preece, there's no way we would do that. There's no way we would do that for Ryan Preece.
Yeah. Oh, what are you saying? What are you saying there, Paul?
Oh, I'm saying nothing.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, of all your Stafford victories, that's the one that jumps out to me as a fan because that was a hell of a race.
What, you didn't like the Open 80 last year when I showed up unannounced and late pitted because I didn't have a pit crew and used Baldwin to change my tires?
I've never seen anyone go 3 wide on the top and pass 2 cars. I've never seen that before, and you made it work. Didn't love the unannounced, but that's okay. You still showed up.
Yeah.
So.
You want to know what? It was really because the tips were pointed at a 90-degree angle and the downforce was just right, and those super soft tires that you guys had put aside for me.
It was a hell of a show. Show.
Yeah, it was fun. It was good.
So let's continue on your career here. Let's get past the tips. So
you know I was going to sneak it in there.
Of course. You race for a full season for JD Motorsports. I would call it an underfunded team, but still, you know, a great team, and supported a lot of drivers over the year. So that was your first full time in Xfinity. You raced a lot at a lot of tracks you never been to. What was that like? Kind of just traveling the country, hitting every single cup track that you've grown up your whole life, like just watching on TV.
Yeah, it was different. Definitely, it was different for sure. So I mean, it was a learning experience for 1.5 miles. I got laps, and that was that was good, and that really kind of got my feet wet for the next year when I ran those 4 races with JGR. So other than that, it was you kind of saw a different side of things. You got to realize the inner workings of the top 3 series and kind of how things work, and it was good experience.
And then eventually, you do the Gibbs deal. You get the 2 wins. in that time, you also grabbed 2 Sizzler victories, which from the beginning of the career, you didn't qualify. And then you go back to back and you win 2 straight Sizzlers in an iconic paint scheme, in my opinion. That orange and white paint scheme is, you know, there's a picture of you stopping on the front stretch when you're trying to do a burnout.
I broke it.
That picture though is awesome with the crowds kind of down on the iconic the Troyer scheme, and to win 2 Sizzlers puts you up with some of the all-time greatest modified drivers ever to drive at Stafford.
And I'm pretty sure because my grandfather won there. Him and I are, you know, we both won it. So that was really cool too. But I'll never forget. Yep. So I'll never forget to this day. I went to go do a burnout, and I ran a 4-length suspension race car and what they call, like, I was doing some different stuff. And I went to do a burnout, and I ended up ripping the drive shaft out, and the way everything was with the bird cages, it broke everything on the rear end. I'm talking thousands of dollars. I wrecked the race car after the race. And I looked at Eddie. I was like, man, JRI, these shocks are not cheap. It ripped the shafts completely in half. It just killed it. So that was the end of doing burnouts in a race car, in a modified anyways. But yeah, that was a big day. That was actually a big year in 2017 or was it? Yeah, it was. So 2017 was a big year for me and winning races with Eddie, and that was a big year of learning how to set race cars up and, you know, make those calls, and it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun that year.
Yeah, you won a bunch of times in that 6 car. That car was fast that year. And then I believe that's the year you announced you're gonna join the Cup Series, or was that 2018?
That was 2018.
So that was after the second Sizzler win. So so that's got to be a big day, right? Not many people. Yeah. It's not many people can say they drove a full Cup this season. Forget even just a Cup start, but you get the phone call and you're a full-time Cup driver.
Yeah, I remember when that all was kind of going down. It happened really quick, and that was during when I was racing for JGR, and we were, you know, we won Bristol, and then obviously at New Hampshire we were in really well, and things were just starting to whirlwind, and kind of one of those stories where it was like Steve Park, where he got that phone call. Same deal. It was hey, why don't you come over to our shop, come check this all out, and I went there. And I was actually shocked. I was really surprised when I went there because I didn't really know. You know, I figured that you kind of, you know, you hear of different teams and you don't really know much about them. You just kind of think that, you know, they buy their parts and pieces from this one or that one. And JTG Daugherty was actually building towards being, you know, where they were doing their own stuff at the time. And so there was a lot of potential. There still is, and we continue to still build. So we have days where we run really well, and I think it's just creating that notebook and getting to where you want to be. So, but yeah, it was a big moment actually. So when I go to see Tommy Baldwin, I end up running into Steve Park, and we all end up talking about modifieds. And
that's awesome.
And those days, so it is really cool and a lot of fun, but. You know, I think back, you know, usually when I start reminiscing with Steve and Tommy, you know, they had their days back in, you know, the 90s, and then I had mine, and we start talking about Teddy and talking about Keith and Woody and, you know, Rowan and all these rivalries we had. That's what makes racing. That's what brings the show. You guys call it the show. Right?
Exactly, it's the show.
So I think about those years of the intense battles, you know, whatever the games are in the pit area or whatever it may be. That's what makes Stafford Speedway what it is. It was the naturally born rivalries. Now you guys have your Ronnie Williams and Keith Rocco and, you know, whatever it is. So that's what's cool. You know, I think back, Keith ended up moving to Berlin 2 minutes up the road, and I remember him calling because he didn't have any fuel one night and he needed fuel at scale, and I didn't have any, so I
Never
would have
told him
gave
to
it
go
to him.
screw.
But we just, in the end, you end up respecting. I respect him for what he's done, what he's built, and what he's done for himself. So that's really cool. Teddy, obviously, you go back and you look back all those races. I say to people, the last race I raced against Teddy, I'll never forget. They were double file in front of us, and I forgot who it was. I think it was Rowan and someone else. I can't remember now, but I remember Teddy was riding behind me. Like, I was waiting for him to punt me because I'm trying to run the top, run the bottom, like trying to figure out whichever lane's going to go, I'm ready. And he didn't hit me. He didn't nerf me even when he got under me or outside of me. He didn't do anything. And I almost felt like that was the day where I had respect with him to where he wasn't just going to move me out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was it was interesting. And I also remember earlier that year him talking to me about stuff with the Xfinity series, and I said I was skipping a race, and he looked at me and was like, "Why are you gonna do that?" Like, when we were close in the Tour Championship, because that's what I remember people always said with him in the modifieds, and I was willing to skip some things to make something happen. So I just felt like that was a year that I gained respect from a guy like him. I'll never know, but it was there was a lot of memories, thinking back and teach you how to be a race car driver and as a person.
Yeah, and I think you made an interesting point there about talking with Tommy Baldwin and Steve Park talking about the rivalries. I'm interested to get your, are Cup drivers are they tuned into what's going on, across the country, across the short tracks of the world, of the country, or they kind of just like in their zone?
I think each of them are all into their own, part of the country. I think you have some guys, if you're from the late model, you're very in touch with late models. If you're from sprint cars, you're in touch with that. I'm from modifieds.
Yeah.
I'm the only one. So a lot of those guys, the Tommy Baldwins, a lot of you'd be surprised with how many crew members are from up north and love modified racing. So a lot of, modified guys, they're in touch with it. They see what's going on. We know, I know, I'm following Race Monitor or whatever it may be, typically every Friday night when I'm sitting there. So I definitely know what's going on, and Tommy knows what's going on. We're usually texting each other back and forth.
Who do you think, of all the Cup guys out there now, would be the best SK driver at Stafford? If you had to pick a guy out of the field and say, we're going to toss him in an SK tonight, see how he does.
I don't know. I think
pick one.
I don't know. I have no clue. I think I joke with people that modified racing, some of the roughest racing out there. I don't know. I think Newman would do great. I think Kevin would do great. Obviously Newman, just because he has so much modified experience and he ain't afraid, you know what I mean? And neither is Kevin. So those are two guys that I would say would dish it really quick and be just fine and probably win quite a few races. So I think those would be the two that stick out of my mind.
All right, so time for some rapid fire. We kind of cap off the show with a bunch of just questions. The first thing that pops up, you toss it out. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Biggest rival. You named a bunch, but you have to pick your top one. Keith Rocco. He's a lot of guys' biggest rival. All right, what's your biggest? Okay, we're gonna to break this down. Your biggest modified victory.
That's tough. Not really rapid fire, but I'll probably go with Stafford, the Sizzler, 2017.
How about your biggest of the biggest? Doesn't have to be a modified all time in the career.
Bristol.
So not the
could
first
be
or
Iowa,
second race.
Yeah, both of them were they stand out for two different reasons, but Bristol really changed. Iowa changed everything, but Bristol really changed everything.
Put you on the map. Toughest driver you've ever competed against?
Teddy.
It's a common answer. He was rough. Favorite track? You don't have to say Stafford. I'll be disappointed if you don't, though. No, I'm kidding. Your favorite track?
Probably Riverhead. I like the quarter miles. I enjoy that style of racing. I enjoy there's two different styles, and there's a reason why a lot of guys that run well at Stafford succeed at New Hampshire, because it's the same style of racing. And that's always been a place that's kind of, I've gotten really close to winning, but I really, I haven't won a points paying race there, but it's just two different styles.
What is your least favorite track?
Seekonk.
Seekonk. Why is that?
Seekonk. I don't know. It doesn't work very well for me. And I know why. It's because I drive off the throttle pedal, and that doesn't work there. You got to drive off the right front, so it doesn't work out too well.
So on that same scale there, what's the most technical track they've ever driven? Like the most, just a challenge?
In a modified was Lime Rock.
Lime Rock, okay.
I'm kidding. No. Monadnock.
Really?
Two different corners. It's totally different. You can overdrive turn 3 so quick if you don't hook the bottom. It's just different. And then you can burn the right, like Justin Bonser was talking about it the other day on Twitter, about 2014 when I led 120 laps, lapped all the way up to third, and then threw an anchor out and lost the lead and lost the win. Just because, you got to understand when to go. That track almost baits you into burning off a right rear tire. So that place is definitely interesting.
All right. So the last question here. What if you had to pick a season that was your best one, your all-time, your favorite?
2017. 17. I mean, 2013 was a really good year. A lot of wins. 2017, I would have to say there's two. So 2013, because I won that championship on the tour. I won a lot of races at Stafford that year. Won a lot of races at Thompson, I believe, too. But 2017 was the year I moved home. Eddie hired me to work for him full time. I set him up. We did the deal. We won. That was, I think, one of my most successful years on the Whelen Modified Tour as far as win averages that year. So we won a lot of races. And I always joke with Doug because he's 6-time. I call him 5.5 time. So that is something.
Because you didn't have the full.
Well, we won. Yeah, because we won the Owners' Championship, and I skipped 2 races, but I always joke.
5.5. That's fair.
So, and what Doug's been able to accomplish is a Hall of Fame career, right? Like that he's won 6 tour championships and a lot of races. And, thinking about back in when this whole deal started, his first championship was 2012, right? So him and I went back and forth for many years.
You lost seconds to him.
I had a lot of seconds to him. I did.
sorry, but he's not in the Cup Series, so you could tell him that.
That's all right. Yeah.
So I like to kind of ask this a question of all the guests because it's important that we continue the sport. We kind of embrace the change. Kind of what is your take on the direction of local racing? Are we going the right direction, the wrong direction? Think it's improving. To ignore this pandemic because who knows what this is going to cause. But I think if you go back to, say, February before this all happened, do you think, are we going the right direction across the board of sport?
I think so. I think that the short track racing is on its way up more than ever. I think this is a good time. I also think that, we have to keep – so there's so many stories, but somebody who I grew up around when I was younger, I had a lot of memories, was my father bringing me to the Pryor Brothers, which used to race at, all the short tracks in Connecticut. They used to build their own cars. And they told me back in the day, they used to show up, at the beginning of the season and look at what everybody did different, and say, oh, that was a good idea. So going back to that, I think a lot of people, instead of complaining when they do something different, it's why not think about, well, that was a good idea. I'm going to go do that. Mm-hmm. So I think as racetracks, everybody needs to work together, and there's things that everybody can do. It's not necessarily outspending somebody, it's outthinking them. So when somebody comes up with a good idea, just tell people to go do that.
Don't cancel
so I think
it.
those are the things we got to bring the side where people hold on, sorry. We got to bring the side where people were thinking about things and trying different things back into the racing instead of just piecing things together. We got to bring that side of racing back, and I think that'll definitely drum up some more interest and make people want to get involved more.
Great. Well, appreciate you coming on the show. You're a very important part of the modified community, especially Stafford. We're all pretty pumped that you're in the Cup Series. It's kind of the only reason a lot of us even tune in, to be honest. So we hope you do well, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Yep. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Waddell Communications. Big supporter of mine. I always want to mention the Rat. He's the man. So thanks for having me on. You never know if I show up at Stafford again.
We hope to see you soon.
Thanks.